Recently on Twitter, people have been telling jokes or making jokes about the joke that they would make, which is rather meta, and people have been doing this about all sorts of topics, and philosophy and philosophers are one of those sets of topics. So I thought I would do a roundup of what I consider to be the best ones. Now, obviously, humor is very subjective, so you might not see these as the best ones yourself, but you're welcome to put other ones in the comments on this video or in Twitter as well. That's where all these are coming from. So this is probably the most meta of the jokes that are out there about this, because it's jokes about jokes and about the trolley problem. There are 5 jokes about Emanuel Kant tied to one track, and 1 joke about John Stuart Mill tied to another track, and a joke about Philippa Foot is running downhill out of control. Fortunately, you're standing next to a lever which, when thrown, will redirect. Now notice that this is a trivial trolley problem, is it not? Because what happens if Philippa Foot runs over jokes about Emanuel Kant or jokes about John Stuart Mill? Obviously, people aren't hurt, but you never know. So let's move on to the litany of jokes. Here we have the pre-Socratics. I had a joke about Heraclitus, but now it's gone. Followed by, I had a joke about Parmenides, just the one. Those are the 2 that are often counterposed to each other. Heraclitus, obviously, being the person who, although he believes in a logos, says that everything is in flux. Parmenides saying there isn't everything in flux, there's just the one thing, and it doesn't flux at all. It doesn't change, it just is. Then we have his disciple, Zeno. I know a joke about Zeno, but if I start, I never get to the end. Zeno had the paradoxes of motion, for example, the archer or the Achilles and the tortoise. And then we have, I have a joke about Protagoras, but it's only relatively funny. Protagoras famously said, human being is the measure of all things, endorsing perhaps a certain kind of relativism. Then we get Socrates, and Plato's mixed in here, of course. I have a joke about Socrates, but it's questionable. I get that one, right? He's always asking questions, and then we see him doing this afterwards. I have a joke about Plato, and then Socrates says, what's a joke? I have a joke about Socrates, but Plato tells it better. Well, this is alluding to the so-called Socratic problem. How much of what we're getting about Socrates is actually straight out of Plato? And then finally, here's the sort of way Plato depicts Socrates. My friend, you have a joke about Plato. To tell a joke, you must understand what it means to be funny. Please explain it to me. I am ignorant of such things and wish to be enriched by your knowledge. Moving on to Plato himself, here's a couple jokes about ideals and things that are perfect. I thought of a joke about Plato. If I told it to you, it would be a shadow of its true form. I have a Plato joke. I can only tell it under ideal circumstances. I know a joke about Plato, and it's perfect. And then we have another good one. I have a joke about Plato, but it's spurious. What is that referring to? Some of the Platonic dialogues are perhaps not written by Plato. And then we have, I could tell a joke about Plato, but nobody in this cave with me would get it. Not bad. Here's some about Aristotle. I have a joke about Aristotle, and it's golden, but mean. There's a terrible pun, right? I have a joke about Aristotle, but I have to practice until it's excellent, as if, well, Aristotle actually does talk about joking, eutropoleia, as a virtue. Then in the last one, I have a joke about Aristotle, but it's lost, as are many of Aristotle's texts. Then we have Cicero. These are kind of rough. I had a joke about Cicero, but difficult to understand because only at the end of a very long sentence with lots of clauses and anecdotes, like one about a random patrician going to fish markets 200 years before the joke, the verb I put it was. Cicero writes very longish paragraphs, and here's the next one. I have a joke about Cicero, but it'll take a few hours to finish. And then finally, I had a joke about Cicero, but I haven't found the verb yet. Moving on, Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher. I have a joke about Epictetus, but I'm trying not to feel too strongly about it. I have a bad Epictetus joke, but you probably wouldn't mind either way. And then this is a rough one. I had a joke about Epictetus, but it was kind of lame. If you don't know, Epictetus himself, the great Stoic philosopher, born a slave, was lamed by his owner before being freed. Moving on to the medievals. Here's some early to mid-medieval, right? I have a joke about St. Augustine, but now you ask me, I can't remember what it is. I used to tell a joke about Augustine, but I stole it from a neighbor. Two really great references to Augustine's Confessions. I leave it to you to read the text and look them up. The next two are about Boethius. If it is any consolation, I have a joke about Boethius, obviously consolation of philosophy, in which the other joke fits in. I have a Boethius joke, but it's still spinning between good and bad, spinning on the wheel of fortune. Then we have some Anselm jokes, obviously coming from the Proslogion too. I have a joke about St. Anselm, but you couldn't conceive of it. I have a joke about Anselm, which is proof that a greater joke exists. So they're not getting Anselm wrong on that, which is nice. Then we have some Peter Abelard ones. There were quite a few of these. Got a joke about Peter Abelard, but it's annoying as fuck and goes on forever. I have a joke about Peter Abelard. It's by far the most intelligent joke of all of 12th century Paris. Now, Abelard was pretty famous for not just long-windedness, but thinking he was the smartest guy around. Here's another one. Do I have a good joke about Peter Abelard? Well, yes and no. Sic et non, right? His famous treatise. Now, here's another one that's even worse than the one about Epictetus and lameness. I have a joke about Peter Abelard, but I don't have the balls to tell it. Abelard was famously castrated for his love affair with Eloise. Then we've got some about Aquinas and Ockham. I have a joke about Aquinas, but I'm not sure if it's a philosophical or a theological one. It produces that distinction, and Thomas have been arguing about where the boundaries are ever since. I used to tell a joke about Aquinas, and it worked some of the time. Summa theologiae, summa contra gentiles. Well, you win summa, you lose summa. This is a Thomas Aquinas joke. And then Occam, what are they going to joke about? Occam's razor, obviously. I have a joke about Occam, but it's pretty simple. And then I had a joke about Occam's razor, but it was needlessly complicated. We move on into the early modern period with some Descartes jokes. I have a joke about Descartes, but I don't remember it clearly and distinctly. Clear and distinct ideas are Descartes' criterion for genuine knowledge. I think I have a joke about Descartes, therefore I am a joke about Descartes. Now, this is very funny because obviously it gets Descartes wrong, right? But in a certain way, thinking about a joke is definitely within the realm of thought, and the mirth or humor that results from it is also a thought for Descartes. Also have a good one about Descartes, but I don't want to keep waxing on. That's referring to Meditations 2, right? And the next one, I have a joke about Descartes, but it's really two jokes referring to the dualism between substances of mind and extended substance. And then finally, Harry Turtledove, the great sci-fi author, weighs in. I have a joke by Descartes' dog. I eats, therefore I ams. Oh, that's a terrible one, right? Ams is a type of dog food. A lot of things about Spinoza, and then a few about other moderns as well. I have a Spinoza joke, but it might create bad optics. Not bad, but to be fair, none of these are funny. I think some of them are funny, but yeah, I get the optics. He was a lens grinder. I have a joke about Spinoza, but it has no substance. I mean, the joke there, obviously, is that's all Spinoza talks about. I have a joke about Spinoza, but it's purposeless. Spinoza famously rejected purposes or final causes. And then this is very low-hanging fruit. I had a joke about Thomas Hobbes. It was nasty, brutish, and short. Doesn't mention the joke. I have a joke about Bishop Berkeley, and he doesn't see it. Berkeley was the idealist who said to be is to be perceived. Seeing is a type of that. And then finally, I have a savage joke about Rousseau, but it's ignoble. Rousseau thought the savages were fairly noble, right? Next, we have some Hume jokes. I have a joke about David Hume. People always laugh when I tell it, but I can't be sure it's funny. He's got another one. I've a joke about Hume, but I don't know if it will cause you to laugh. Hume, very famously attacked or critiqued the idea that we have causality as something that we perceive. And we can never truly be sure about things that way, right? What else do we have from Hume? I've got a joke about Hume in my head, but do I have it? Hume said that the self was merely a bundle of ideas and impressions, so that there really is no self. And then finally, I have a joke about Hume, but it doesn't consist of abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number, nor experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact or existence. So what do you have to do with it? Consign it to the flames, right? So that's one of the problems with Hume's philosophy. We move on to Emanuel Kant. I have a joke about Kant, and it's very enlightening. Okay, Kant, what is enlightenment? I have a joke about Kant, but it's too much a thing in itself. The Ding in Sieg. I have a joke about Kant, but telling it would not be acting in accordance with a maxim which I could will to be a universal law. First formulation of the categorical imperative. And then another one referring to that. I have a joke about Kant, but unconditional laughter is not guaranteed for all listeners, which would not necessarily be a reason not to tell the joke. We've got a few Hegel ones here. I heard a joke about Hegel, but I didn't get it. Referring to Hegel's difficulty. I can tell you a joke about Hegel if you're not in good spirits, right? Phenomenology of spirit, or Geist, also translated as mind. And then finally, I have a joke about Hegel and Marx, but you'll need to stand on your head to get it. Marx famously turns Hegel's, whatever we want to call it, system, ideas, approach, method on its head, transmuting it from idealism into materialism. Got some Kierkegaard jokes here. I thought of a joke about Soren Kierkegaard, but if I told it, it would no longer be a transcendent act of faith for you to believe the joke exists. And then along the same lines, I have a joke about Kierkegaard, but it is quite a leap. Finally, I have a joke about Kierkegaard, but whether I tell it or not, I'll regret it either way, referring to either or. Then we've got some Schopenhauer jokes. And actually, some of these are kind of good. I have a joke about Schopenhauer, but I'm afraid it's rather depressing. Okay, that's low-hanging fruit. I would tell a joke about Schopenhauer, but I just don't have the will. That's even better. It happened to me. I made a Schopenhauer joke, and nobody laughed. More pessimism. And then we've got this one referring back to Hegel. I mean, I would do a Schopenhauer stand-up show, but I'm sure only 5 people would show up and the show would get canceled. Apparently, Hegel jokes are more popular. That's referring to Schopenhauer lining himself up against the very popular Hegel and being sorely disappointed in the process. John Stuart Mill, great utilitarian philosopher, among other things. I have a John Stuart Mill joke, but I'm not sure I see the utility in it anymore. That's pretty good. I have a John Stuart Mill joke, but it won't tell it for the greater good. Again, utilitarianism. And then we've got another one. I have a John Stuart Mill joke I'm confident the majority of you will enjoy. And then we have a reference to On Liberty and the harm principle. I have a joke on John Stuart Mill, but it might harm you. So we can't harm people, right? Some good Nietzsche jokes. I have a joke about Nietzsche, but only a few free spirits will grasp it. That's sort of Nietzsche interpretation in a nutshell. I would tell a joke about Nietzsche, but it's abysmal. Nietzsche famously talks about staring into the abyss. I've got a joke about Nietzsche that's so good I could go on repeating it forever. Okay, reference to eternal recurrence of the same. I have a Nietzsche joke, but I haven't the will to tell it, similar to Schopenhauer, but both of them do talk about will quite a bit. And then finally, somebody who probably didn't quite get it. I think he's actually being a straight man, the serious guy about this. These Nietzsche jokes are disgraceful to such a serious, superior type person. Study the books as far as you can and you will find incomparable treasures. It's always funny to see people not getting a joke, right? And so that's the best joke of all, except for this one, which we're going to end on. I have a Renaissance humanism joke, but the scholars are still feuding over whether it really came from Plato, Aristotle, Epictetus, or Pliny. That's, if you know anything about Renaissance scholarship and humanism, you'll get that one. There could be many others that would be telling that. So that's it for the jokes. Like I said, humor is a little subjective. You may not think these are quite so funny. Maybe in explaining them, I've made them less funny, or maybe I made them more funny. I don't really know, but I got a kick out of this, and I hope you do too.